Welcome to the Pathway of Truth, where we discuss biblical history, prophecy, end times, and current times. In today's discussion, we'll discuss Esau's birthplace, his religion, his beliefs, his mannerisms, and we'll see if history lines up with what the scriptures say. Isaiah 21 will be the main focus, but before we get into it, let's examine Esau some. Within Israel, one of the first things you learn is Esau is the white man. And according to scripture, we should be able to find out who Esau is, but not just scripture, also other history books and so forth. And so let's go into the scripture that is widely used to prove that Esau is the white man and see if it holds true. Genesis 25, verse 25. And the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And after that came his brother out, and his hand took hold on Esau's heel. And his name was called Jacob, and Isaac was 80 years old when she bare them. All right? So right here, you can just close the book, hang it up and say that because he was born red, because that's what his name means, that he's a so-called white man. And the argument is, who turns red when they get mad, etc. And I too once believed that to be true, not out of ignorance, but out of not studying. The scriptures say study to show thyself approved. The scriptures also say that if you really want to be a king, that you have to do what? That you have to read, study, and so forth. No man can prove to be a king if he does not study for himself. If somebody else thinks for you, you're not fit to be king. Let's prove that real quick. Proverbs 25 and verse 2. It is the glory of God to conceal a thing, but the honor of kings is to search out a matter. So if you want to be a king, so-called in your mind, you call yourself a ruler, a leader, etc., it is commanded and it is the honor of a king to search out a matter, all right? And so to search out a matter doesn't mean you're against your brother, doesn't mean that you're against your elder or whoever else. That means that you want to seek truth. The scriptures tell us that we shall seek the truth, right? Right? And so in order to do so, that means you're going to have to read. You're going to have to research. You're going to have to spend the time doing it. I've done it for over 2 years now, dealing with this topic, not for glory, not for vainglory, not for pride or anything like that, but for truth, all right? So that you can lead others to the truth. So in examining it and doing as commanded according to the glory of God, when he conceals certain understandings, it's up to us to search it out to prove if those things are right. So let's go back to Genesis chapter 25 and let's start at verse 19. And these are the generations of Isaac, Abraham's son. Abraham begat Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he took Rebekah to wife, the daughter of Bethuel, the Syrian of Padan Aram, the sister to Laban the Syrian. And Isaac entreated the Lord for his wife because she was barren, and the Lord was entreated of him. And Rebekah his wife conceived, and the children struggled together within her. And she said, If it be so, why am I thus? And she went to inquire of the Lord, and the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. And the one people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. So within the scripture, you see the statement that there will be 2 manner of people, right? And so what manner of people would it be? Because when you read in Josephus, it tells you that these 2 brothers had everything in common, right? Everything in common, including the way that they looked. So it wasn't necessarily the 2 manner of people being, one being white and one being black, or one having some type of attribute of liking to hunt and things of that nature, but it dealt with more of a spiritual aspect of these 2 brothers. Let's prove that. Let's go into the book of Jasher and see if we can get a little more deeper history on the dealings of Jacob and Esau and their mindset, right? This is the book of Jasher, chapter 28 and 17. And after this, Salak, the son of Raphathshad, died in that year, which is the 18th year of the lives of Jacob and Esau. So they're about 18 years old, young men. And all the days that Salak lived were 433 years, and he died. At that time, Isaac sent his younger son Jacob to the house of Shem and Eber, and he learned the instructions of the Lord. And Jacob remained in the house of Shem and Eber for 32 years. And Esau his brother did not go, for he was not willing to go, and he remained in his father's house in the land of Canaan. So here's a difference between the two. Here's a different manner of people that they were, all right? And so we get an understanding now that Jacob was more about his father's business and Esau was not. All right. His manner, as we know, as you read in the Bible and in the book of Joshua and other books, he was always in the fields and so forth. He was always hunting or whatever, which we all did back then. So it wasn't just like the so-called white man. Everybody had to hunt to survive at some point in time. But that's the type of thing that he would do, and he was good at it. He was so good at it that he was the one who killed Nimrod, right, in Africa. All right, in Africa, in the desert, right? So when you look at the attributes of the manner of the two brothers, it's dealing with the mindset of the brothers. One had a mind for the Lord and one did not. And as you read on, you'll see that Esau, when he married his strange wives, he also dealt with strange gods. Why? Because he didn't have the same mannerisms, right, as his brother. And his brother's mannerisms dealing with the Lord. Esau's did not. So as you go back to Genesis 25, verse 23, when the Lord said unto her, 2 nations are in thy womb, and 2 manner of people shall be separated from thy bowels. Those 2 different nations of people, obviously Jacob and Esau, both gave birth to nations, which we'll touch on in a little bit, dealing with the nations of Esau, because we all, for the most part in Israel, agree that Jacob is the forefather of the 12 tribes, which are the so-called Negroes and indigenous slaves among all of the Americas and the 4 corners of the earth. All right. So dealing with Esau, the 2 nations that are in thy womb and the 2 manner of people, again, dwelt with the mindset of the people that would come from them as well, that were separated from thy bowels. And when you read the history, you'll see the different wars that went on between us and between Edom, even during the time of Maccabees, which during the time of Maccabees proves to you that Edom and Rome were 2 separate people, which we covered already in the seed of Japheth, dealing with Rome. All right. So it says, 2 manner of people shall be separated from their bowels, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other people, and the elder shall serve the younger. When it says the elder shall serve the younger, that is going to prophecy dealing with when you read in 2nd Esdras, right? So let's go to the book of 2nd Esdras to get further understanding. 2nd Esdras, 6th chapter, 7th verse. Then answered I and said, what shall be the parting asunder of the times? Or when shall be the end of the first and the beginning of it that followeth? And he said unto me, from Abraham unto Isaac, when Jacob and Esau were born of him, Jacob's hand held first the heel of Esau. For Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth. All right? So that's going into the prophecy, right, of the new kingdom coming about and so forth. When Christ returns, Esau is going to be the end of the world as we know it, right? So that'll be the last rulership. And then after that, we would take the reins of rulership, right? So when it says, for Esau is the end of the world, we automatically assume, because of who's in power right now, that, oh, that has to be America or, the so-called white men, etc. But that's not what it's saying. And so when you look further into it and you deal with who Japheth is and you deal with who the nations are today, as covered in part 1, you see clearly that Gog and Magog is going to have a time when they rule, or when they try to battle in the end time and so forth, which is a different end time scenario that is during the reign of Christ. This end time scenario is happening right before Christ's return, right? So you have 2 different end time scenarios, and it's telling you that in future prophecy, based off of Genesis 25, that the elder will serve the younger at some point in time. And at that point in time, right, when we come into rulership, you'll know who Esau really is. How do we know? Because of the prophecy. So let's go into the prophecy. Revelation 17, and I'm going to start at verse 7. There's a lot of depth that you can get into with this chapter, but for today's purposes, we're going to jump to the point. And the angel said unto me, wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. The beast that thou sawest was and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life from the foundations of the world, when they beheld the beast that was and is not, and yet is, right? And so this might seem like a deep saying, but he's going to explain it in the next couple verses. And here is the mind which have wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen, and 1 is, and the other is not yet come. All right, so it's telling you right here exactly who the 7 heads are, right? The 7 kings is what it's telling you. It says 5 are fallen, right? Verse 10 says 5 of the kings have fallen. What are the 5 kings that fell? Egypt, number 1. Assyria, number 2. Babylon, number 3. Persian Mede, number 4. And Greece being number 5. These are the 5 kings or kingdoms that fell before this time. All right? So when it says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, these are the 5 that is referring to. It says, and 1 is. So of all those kings that fell before, there was 1 kingdom that was in rulership at this time. And that kingdom at the time was the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire during this time was in rulership. So we know who the 6th kingdom is because we know when the scriptures were written, we know at that time that the Roman Empire was in rulership. All right? So it says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, and 1 is. And the other is not yet come. So this other that has not yet come that was in this vision, who would it be? It would be the 7th kingdom after the Roman kingdom, which was what? Who took down the Roman kingdom? The Ottoman Empire, a Muslim empire, took down the Roman Empire. All right? So number 7 would be the Ottoman Empire, all right, as we know it. And verse 10, it says, and there are 7 kings, 5 are fallen, 1 is, and the other is not yet come. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space, meaning he will have a rulership for a short space. All right? And the beast that was in his vision, and is not, meaning he wasn't in rulership just yet, even he, that same kingdom, that 7th kingdom, even he is the 8th kingdom, which will be the next one to come to have some type of rulership, right? Before Israel comes back into rulership, it's telling you that he is the 8th. So it can't be America, because America would have had to been of the 7th kingdom, meaning America would have had to be of the Ottoman Empire. All right, so when you say things like it's the so-called white man and it's America, etc., you have to examine it according to scripture. So the 7th and the 8th are one and the same. So it says, and the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7th, and goeth into perdition. Goeth into perdition where? Remember, we read earlier in Revelation dealing with Japheth and dealing with Esau, or what you might call an Arab, or what we call the Arabs, coming together in the latter times to fight in war against Yeshua. Those are things that are going to happen in the future, and it tells you exactly who they are. So when you go back to 2nd Ezra and you deal with Esau being the end of the world, right, there's going to be another rulership that comes. That's that 8th kingdom that will come. Jacob will be the beginning of it that followeth. Those are the end time situations that you read about in 2nd Ezra 15 with the Carmanians and with the dragons of Arabia coming into play. That latter part of the times, that's how you know the scriptures are referring to Esau, right, coming out of this 7th empire, or coming out of this 8th empire, the Neom Muslim empire that is to come. These scriptures point directly to him. But let's further examine. So as we go back to Genesis 25, the big, what I would call misconception dealing with Esau is the fact that he was called red because of this red pottage that had the red meat in it and so forth. But the pottage itself, when you read in verse 34, it says, then Jacob gave Esau bread and pottage of lentils, right? And it was a lentil that made it red. And he did eat and drink and rose up and went his way. Now let's jump back and let's deal with the color issue to see if we can find some discrepancies, or if we find proof that based on his skin color makes him the so-called white man. So when you go back to Genesis 25, in verses 25, it says, and the first came out red all over like a hairy garment, and they called his name Esau. And so we should just be able to end the conversation here. But when you look further into it, there's more scriptures to prove that that had nothing to do with white skin, because it wasn't leprosy. Because if it was leprosy, there'd be certain laws concerning Esau and his descendants that they wouldn't be able to dwell among us and so forth at certain points in time. So let's just look at the color, for instance, and let's see if there is a correspondence between Israel and between Esau when dealing with color. So it's commonly known among Israel that we fled into Egypt, all right, because we want to hide among other dark nations. And so when you read in Matthew, the 2nd chapter, the 13th verse, it says, "And when they were departed, behold, an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise and take the young child and his mother and flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek to kill the child, to seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt. And he was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of the Lord by the prophet, saying, Out of Egypt have I called my son." Christ and his family were commanded to go down into Egypt and to hide among other dark nations. Right? You see the same thing happening with Esau. This is the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11, and verse 14. "And the Lord stirred up an adversary unto Solomon, Hadad, the Edomite. He was a king's seed in Edom. For it came to pass when David was in Edom, and Joab, the captain of the host, was gone up to bury the slain, after he had smitten every male in Edom for 6 months, did Joab remain there with all Israel, until he had cut off every male in Edom. That Hadad fled, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him, to go into Egypt." So here you see Hadad and other Edomites fleeing down into Egypt. So these are dark-skinned men that are fleeing down into Egypt to hide among who? Other dark-skinned men, the same way Christ did. It says Hadad being yet a little child. So this was a little kid. So it wasn't like he was a grown man who had some type of military might. This was a young child, young dark-skinned man with other dark-skinned men going and fleeing down into Egypt to hide among the other Egyptians. It says, "And they arose out of Midian and came to Paran. And they took men with them out of Paran, and they came to Egypt unto Pharaoh, king of Egypt, which gave him a house." So he gave him a house and gave him land. So he gave him food, land, house, and so forth. "And Hadad found great favor in the sight of Pharaoh, so that he gave him a wife, the sister of his own wife, the sister of Talaphanes the queen." So here it is. We know in history, when you read in Genesis, Esau had what you would call today African wives and Ishmaelite wives, all right, dark-skinned women. And here it is, over time, he flees into Egypt. So those same children that were produced from Esau and his African and Ishmaelite wives and so forth, those same children now are fleeing into Egypt and getting, yet again, what you would call today African wives, right? And so those people that come from Esau, if they were what you would consider pale skin or lack of pigment or leprous, there's no way that they would flee into Egypt and be able to survive. So just like Christ was commanded to flee into Egypt and to survive among the Egyptians until the time was appointed, so likewise did Esau's descendants flee into Egypt to survive. And not only did they just survive, they thrived. They were given house, food, and even wives. Verse 20, "And the sisters of Taphanes bare him Genubath his son, whom Taphanes weaned in Pharaoh's house, and Genubath was in Pharaoh's household among the sons of Pharaoh. And when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the captain of the host, was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, Let me depart, that I might go into my own country. Then Pharaoh said unto him, But what hast thou lacked with me? That behold, thou seekest to go into thy own country. And he answered, Nothing, howbeit, let me go in any wise. All right? And so here you have history of Esau living and thriving in Egypt. Living and thriving in Egypt, where he hid among other dark nations until the time was appointed for him to return back. So if we want to deal with color simply, only color, then you have to address the issue of, okay, how is this, the so-called white man, thriving in an African country and hiding in an African country? And then you might as well say that the scriptures dealing with Christ in Matthew 2, dealing with us hiding in Egypt and so forth, are null and void, because you can't separate the two and say one means that, but one doesn't. All right. So if we're going to deal with color, let's deal with color. But if not, let's deal with other factors that come into play. In examining Esau, if you're going to say that he is the Arab, there has to be some history between the two that will correlate. And so we'll go back and we'll see some times and relations between Israel and between Edom, and let's see if it lines up with history that has been written during biblical times and in today's time. This is the book of Numbers, chapter 20, and verse 14. And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom, Thus saith thy brother Israel, Thou knowest all the travail that hath befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt, and we have dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians vexed us and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice and sent an angel, and have brought us forth out of Egypt, and behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand nor to the left, until we have passed thy borders. And Edom said unto him, Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with the sword. And the children of Israel said unto him, We will go by the highway, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, then will I pay for it. I will only without doing anything else go through on my feet. And he said, Thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him. So you see some history here between brothers, basically, right? So you see some history, and he's denying him passage, telling him, no, you cannot come through. All right, so and that plays a key part, because when you read in the prophecies in Deuteronomy 28, it said that we were going to bondage and slavery with people who we nor our forefathers had known, right? Who we nor our forefathers had known. So in the scriptures, who does it say we went into slavery under? This is the book of Joel, chapter 3, and start at verse 1. For behold, in those days and in that time, when I shall bring again the captivity of Judah and Jerusalem, I will also gather all nations and will bring them down into the valley of Jehoshaphat, and will plead with them there for my people and for my heritage Israel, whom they have scattered among the nations and parted my land. And they have cast lots for my people, and have given a boy for a harlot, and sold a girl for wine, that they may drink. Yea, what have ye to do with me, O Tyre and Zidon, and all the coast of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if you recompense me swiftly and speedily, will I return your recompense upon your own head, because you have taken my silver and my gold, and have carried into your temples my goodly pleasant things. The children also of Judah and the children of Jerusalem have ye sold unto the Grecians. Right? Have ye sold unto the Grecians, that ye might remove them far from their border. And so Esau was within our borders. Esau was our brother, our neighbor. We can walk through his land to get back to our land. He was our neighbor. He was our brother. And so we were sold unto who? The Grecians, who we read earlier, come from Japheth's seed. All right? And so it's clear that Esau is definitely not the Grecians, or definitely not Rome, but we still have to figure out who they are. And in order to do so, you have to continue to dig and see what some of their customs are, who they're related to, how did they dress, things of that nature. So let's touch on it. So let's go into the book of Josephus, Antiquities of the Jews, and see the dealings between Edom and Israel. All right? So, in the book of Josephus, let's go to book 17, chapter 10, and let's jump down to verse 2. All right? So go back and read the full history on it, and you'll see what's going on. So here's a situation that's happening when at the time we had Herod, who was an Edomite, who was the head of Judea and so forth, because they were set up by the Romans to be in those seats. He had left at this time, dealing with an issue with his family and so forth. And so at that particular time when he left, you had Romans such as Varus, and Sabinus, who wanted to distress the Jews. They wanted to put us to rest, and they knew about the uprising of the Jews and so forth. And so at this time that we were being pressed, it was also the time of Pentecost. And let's see what it says. This is the book of Josephus, book 17, chapter 10, verse 2. But on the approach of Pentecost, which is a festival of ours, so called from the days of our forefathers, a great many 10,000s of men got together, nor did they come only to celebrate the festival, but out of their indignation at the madness of Sabinus and at the injuries he offered them. A great number there was of Galileans, so we had Galileans among us, and Idumeans, and many men from Jericho, and others who had passed over the river Jordan and inhabited those parts. So here it is, you have Galileans, you have men of Jericho, and others who came, and also who else? You have the Idumeans, Edom. During the time when Rome was in rulership, when Rome had the power to oppress or give you freedom and whatnot, as you read in 1 Maccabees, the 8th chapter. All right? And so let's see what happens when these Idumeans and everybody else comes around the time of Pentecost, what the meeting was about. So it says, this whole multitude joined themselves to all the rest and were more zealous than the others, in making an assault on Sabinus in order to be avenged on him. So they were meeting because they wanted to bring an assault upon Sabinus, who was oppressing the people. So it says, so they parted themselves into 3 bands and encamped themselves in the places following. Some of them seized on the hippodrome, and of the others 2 bands. One pitched themselves from the northern part of the temple to the southern, and on the east quarter. But the 3rd band held the western part of the city where the king's palace was. Their work tended entirely to besiege the Romans. So the Galileans, the Idumeans, the men of Jericho, and others, it says their work tended entirely to besiege the Romans, 2 separate people, and to enclose them on all sides. Now Sabinus was afraid of these men's number and of their resolution, who had little regard to their lives, but were very desirous not to be overcome, while they thought it a point of presence to overcome their enemies. So he sent immediately a letter to Varus, and he said, and he used to do, was very pressing with him, and entreated him to come quickly to his assistance, because the forces he had left were in imminent danger, and would probably in no long time be seized upon and cut to pieces, while he did himself get up to the highest tower of the fort Phasaelus, which had been built in honor of Phasaelus, King Herod's brother, and called so when the Parthians had brought him to his death. So here you have the history of Edom fighting along with Israel against the Romans, all right, because they were being oppressed. And at this particular point in time, the Israelites, from whatever tribe, the Edomites from whichever tribe among them, all right, and everybody else who were among us were considered the Jews. So at this time, when they were saying oppressing the Jews, they were including the Edomites into the conversation, right? So let's get further proof that Edom or Idumea or Esau was our closest of kin. So this is the book of the history of the Arabs, chapter 4, the pre-Islamic age, early international relations, all right? So chapter 4, page 40. The Jews were geographically next door neighbors of the Arabians and racially their nearest of kin, all right? So our nearest of kin is the Arabian, nearest of kin, our brother, all right? It says, echo of the desert's origin of the Hebrews abound in the Old Testament. Hebrew and Arabic, as we have learned before, are cognate Semitic tongues, all right? Semitic, meaning Shemite, all right? That's our forefather. All right, this was a language that we would speak coming from him. All right, cognate Semitic tongue. Some of the Old Hebrew Old Testament names are Arabic. For example, those of almost all of Esau's sons. All right, you can read that Genesis 36. All right, also 1 Chronicles chapter 1 and so forth. It says a South Arabian would have but little difficulty in understanding the first verse of Hebrew Genesis. The rudiments of the Hebrew religion, modern research shows, point to beginning in the desert, all right? So these are our nearest of kin. Our languages are such alike that either one of them would have no problem reading either the Bible or whatever other writings that they would have. Why? Because they're nearest of kin, all right? And so you never see in history of the Europeans being our nearest of kin, of us speaking the same languages, of us having the same customs and so forth. But let's see if we can find further proof that we share similar customs as the Arabs. So let's go to the Zondervan Bible Dictionary, right? This is the definition of dress. It says, knowledge of the kind of clothing worn by the people of biblical times comes from scriptural statements, from representations of the people and their clothing we find on monuments, reliefs, seals, plaques, and tomb paintings, and from graves and tomb remains. So to find the history of people, you go back and you see what type of dress they had, and on their monuments, on their writings and things of that nature, to see what you can find, all right, as far as evidence of who these people are. So it says, all these, meaning everything it just named, all these coupled with or joined with the traditions and usages extant among the present Bedouin Arab tribes. So all the biblical things that you see about how we dress and so forth, it says you still see those same things among the Bedouin Arab tribes, or what you might call nomads, all right? It says, lead to the conclusion that at a very early period of a man's existence, he learned the art of spinning and weaving clothes of hair, wool, cotton, flax, and eventually silk, which you read in Genesis, in Ezekiel, and in Job, and other chapters, all right? It says, and from these established certain simple styles which were continued from generation to generation, then carried by Esau and Ishmael and their descendants into Arabia. Esau and Ishmael carried out the same garments that we would wear. Long garments, head covering for the to block out the sun and the heat and so forth, and women wearing dresses and even fringes. They carried these customs from generation to generation. Esau and Ishmael did, and their descendants down into Arabia, where the Arab, or the mixed multitude, because that's what it means, continued them through the centuries, always with a feeling that it was decidedly wrong to change. All right? So they kept our customs. They continued the customs unto this day because they felt like it would be wrong to change those customs. All right? So those customs, the language, right? We share history with the Arabs. It's evident. We share history with the Arabs throughout history, and even still to this day when it comes to our customs and so forth. Those of you who have knowledge of the Quran, you know and understand that they don't eat swine. Where did they get it from? From our forefathers, right? They do certain things, and women have to wear head coverings. Where do they get these ideas from? Where do they get these customs from? They get it from their brothers, the Israelites, right? Because as we just read, we are their nearest of kin, as written in the history of the book of the Arabs, the book of the history of the Arabs, and also as written in the scriptures, all right? So here's more proof. We share the same customs, the same dress, right? The same language. And then eventually they would try to adopt a similar God as ours, where you get Islam from, which goes back into Revelation 17, which I'll touch on in detail in a later class. When you look at the history between Jacob and Esau, and you look at the prophecies concerning such, you'll see that we have more than enough occurrences to see that we had, dealings with each other, spoke each other's language, etc. All right, so when you go to the book of Obadiah, and it's giving you the vision of Obadiah concerning Edom, it's going to explain to you what they did. So let's look at it. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a rumor from the Lord, and an ambassador sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Behold, I have made thee small among the heathen, thou art greatly despised. The pride of thy heart hath deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground?
بدون هم عشائر بدوية هون الحين حوالي 450 عائلة فهم قديم كان وضعهم هون كانوا بدو سكان البتراء الأصليين هم فالحين أغلبية البتراء كامل كلها بدول لأنهم أهلها وجدادنا كنا هون مواليد هون فالحين أكبر أغلبية طبيعة شغلنا مع الأجانب هون.
اللي قدامنا هذا كله كان مسكون. هذا المغر كله. هذا المغر اللي فوق مرتفع هذا كله كنا ساكنين فيه. هذا اشتغلنا فيه هذا كنا ساكنين فيه.
احنا كنا متريحين. هو الإنسان وين بتريح؟ لما يكون فكره متريح وما يسمع ضوضاء وضجيج بتريح. أما لما أنا بدي أجي تعبان ودي أنام مثلاً بشتغل أو شغلة وأجي أنام وأسمع أصوات ما بعرف أنام. هاي السكان المساكنين في المنطقة هذيك. هالمناطق هذه الوديان هذه كلها سكانها. والحكومة مشكورة حطت لهم حنفية مي وصلتهم لهناك اللي هم الحلال هم الكذا لأنه ما ضل غير هذول الناس. موجودين في المغرب اللي قدامنا هذيك بس هسه ما بنشوفهم. لا مبينه بس ما بنشوف الناس، يعني الناس بجوز طالعين يشتغلوا كذا. هي شايفون المغاره اللي قدامنا هاي؟ ارى الشبك على ظهرها. هاي هذه كمان من ساكنين فيها عائلات، وغاد في عائلات قادمه في الوادي فوق، في جنب الجبل هذا كمان في عائلات ساكنين لحد الان. هذول ما لحقهم دور في البناء.
So in the video, as you can see, they even still to this day have descendants who dwell in the clefts of the rocks. Those people have always been there, as he stated. And so these people that dwell in the clefts of the rock, when you look up that word, clefts of the rock, it is Petra, all right? And Petra was the name given to it by the Romans, all right? And the Romans never actually dwelt there, but they sent soldiers and so forth, but they didn't live there, all right? So they would have a band of military there at certain times, but they did not live there because Petra was in the desert, and it was for the people of the desert, all right, where they could worship the idols and practice polytheism until later when Muhammad came and changed it to a monotheist state. But that's later on. All right, so let's continue to read. So it says, who shall bring me down to the ground? Let's jump back up. Verse 3. The pride of thy heart has deceived thee, thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, that saith in his heart, who shall bring me down to the ground? Though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. All right, so what is this going into? Is it going into a flag that they carry and say, hey, look, I'm an eagle and so forth? Because when you look at history, you look at the different nations that use eagles on their flags, yes, America and Spain and Great Britain, all these places, but guess what? Also, the Arabian nations use eagles as a representation. So is this talking about a flag, or is this talking about a certain mindset that they had, a certain way of operating? When it says, though thou exalt thyself as the eagle, and though thou set thy nest among the stars, thence will I bring thee down, saith the Lord. What are the attributes of an eagle? An eagle, obviously, is a predator, right? And they fly above and they prey on those below them. That's their attributes. So that's what they did. That's what Edom did during history and during time. Now, were they a dominant military power? No, they had to have help until they would become one. And so as you'll see here, in order for them to get into their position, when it says, though thou set their nest among the stars, that happened throughout history plenty of times. One particular time is when you read about in Luke, all right, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John during that time, when you had them set up among who are the stars? Israel. They were set up as rulers over us by the Romans, right, to have that rulership position. They were still considered Jews, but we know, based off of our laws and so forth, that particular seat belonged to the Israelites, all right? And so they were set up as leaders, and that's when they set their nests among the stars. Because in the nest, this is where you would nourish your young. This is where you would bring them up, right? This is your place of dwelling, right? They would dwell where? In our seat, in our house. Even to this day, when you go look at it, who's still there to this day? Yes, you have the fake Jews, but you still have who? The Palestinians. So we can argue the points back and forth on who's who, dealing with that prophecy, but let's look further into it here, all right? Verse 5, if thieves come to thee, if robbers by night, how art thou cut off? Will they have not stolen till they had enough? If the grape gatherers came to thee, would they not leave some grapes? How are the things that Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? So what are his hidden things? One of the things that we don't understand, and that what you will understand, is that there's prophecies telling us exactly what those hidden things are, right? And so let's go to a video real quick, and let me show you, based off unbiased opinion, unbiased research, that the people of the land of Petra or Mount Seir, etc., were Arabs, all right? And in particular, one group of Arabs, the Nabateans, were the ones who actually started Islam in Petra, all right? Where Edom dwelt, obviously, which was called Seir, which eventually was called Idumea by the Greeks, all right? And later called Petra by the Romans. So now, as Dan Gilbert brought out the information about the Qiblas, pointing to Petra being the original place of Islam before they left Let's see if the scriptures support this. So remember, the book of Obadiah says in verse 6, how are the things that Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? This is how, through history, through artifacts, through study, through research, and also through the scriptures. So this is the book of Isaiah chapter 21. We're going to start at verse 1. The burden of the desert of the sea. So it automatically gives you a clue on, where this burden would be. It says it's a burden of a desert of the sea. We know that to be Arabia. As we read on, is going to prove it. It says, as whirlwinds in the south pass through, so it cometh from the desert, from a terrible land. A grievous vision is declared unto me. The treacherous dealer dealeth treacherously, and the spoiler spoileth. Go up, O Elam, besiege, O Media. All of the sighing thereof have I made to cease. Therefore are my loins filled with pain. Pains have taken a hold upon me, as the pains of a woman that travaileth. I was bowed down at the hearing of it. I was dismayed at the seeing of it. My heart panted, fearfulness affrighted me. The night of my pleasure hath he turned into fear unto me. Prepare the table, watch in the watchtower, eat, drink, arise, ye princes, and anoint the shield. For thus hath the Lord said unto me, go set a watchman, let him declare what he seeth. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, a chariot of asses, and a chariot of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed.
To rebuild his defenses and prepare for the return of the Umayyad army.
Now I want to show you something. Here are some of the volumes of Al-Tabri's History of Islam. Al-Tabri managed to collect a massive amount of material that he writes about what happened during each year of Islamic history. He devotes whole chapters, sometimes 2 chapters, to every year. But then something strange happens. The battle for the Holy City takes place over several years, but year 70 of Islamic history is of great importance. Now notice, Al-Tabri spends 15 pages describing what happens in year 69, and he spends 27 pages describing what happens in year 71. But where is year 70? Look at this. For year 70, Al-Tabri only records a few lines of text. Did he not find any more information for this year? Or did later editors censor this year from Al-Tabri's record? Only a few lines, but what he records gives us a few tantalizing details. It tells us that Musa'ib ibn Zubair, apparently a brother of Abdullah, brings supplies to the Holy City. Were these supplies military equipment? No, it says he brought many horses and camels. I believe that this is the year that the followers of Ibn Zubair moved south from Petra to the deserts of Arabia to find a place where they could hold out against the Umayyad forces. All details of this year have been removed from Al-Tabri's history. But we know that they obtained many horses and camels, which would have no other purpose than to move many of the people out of the city. This lull in the war continued into the next year. So Ibn Zubair took advantage of the break to undertake a religious project. He decided to rebuild the Kaaba. But Al-Tabri does not tell us where the new Kaaba was constructed. Was it in Petra? Or was it in a new, safer location in faraway Mecca? I believe that the new Kaaba was built in Saudi Arabia, and that the Black Rock was moved there for safekeeping. So even if Ibn Zubair lost the Holy City, he still had the rock and a new Kaaba.
By looking at the floor plan, we can see that the palace and its mosque faced south rather than towards Mecca. That same year, a mosque was built at Anjar, about 58 kilometers from Beirut. It was built near the end of the Umayyad period, and no more than 30 years later, it fell into ruins and eventually was abandoned. Since it was never rebuilt, we can easily determine the Qibla direction, which does not point towards Mecca or Jerusalem. Now, let's put this all together onto one map. The result is amazing. During the first 100 years of Islam, 100% of all the surviving mosques we have located so far face a spot in southern Jordan rather than Mecca. From north, south, east and west, mosques all face towards one spot. This isn't some small error in determining the Qibla direction. They all specifically point to just one place.
Directly under this point is the ancient city of Petra. This is a city that is well known to us today. It is a popular tourist site. Tourists come from all over the world to marvel at the great temples and the monuments in this city. Could it be that Petra is the mother of all cities described in the Quran? It was the focus of the ancient Arab pilgrimage. So could Petra also be the birthplace of Muhammad and the founding city of Esau?
So what was this chariot of horses and camels and asses? That was the migration that you heard Dan Gilbert going over, dealing with the migration from what was formerly known originally as Becca, or the place of mourning, also known as Seir, also known as Petra, right, or Idumea, the place that they were dwelling in before they left to go down into what they would later call Mecca, which in all earlier maps did not exist. And so what he was going into is what you read here in prophecy. But let's continue and let's see if the scriptures line up. All right, verse 7. And he saw a chariot with a couple of horsemen, and chariots of asses, and chariots of camels, and he hearkened diligently with much heed, and he cried, A lion, my lord, I stand continually upon the watchtower in the daytime, and I am set in my ward whole night. So I'm watching day and night is what he's saying. Verse 9. And behold, here cometh a chariot of men with a couple of horsemen. And he answered and said, Babylon is fallen, and all the graven images of her God he hath broken unto the ground, which again I'll cover in the next class. Oh, my threshing, the corn of my floor, that which I have heard of the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, have I declared unto you. Now let's see what this burden of the desert is. The burden of Dumah, he calleth to me out of Seir, watchman. What of the night? Watchman. What of the night? So let's see what the watchmen of Seir have to say. The watchman said, the morning cometh. So there's going to be that day that cometh, the day that we all know of. The morning cometh, and also the night. And also the night. He comes as a thief in the night. So the day of judgment is coming. He says, if you will inquire ye, return and come. So he's telling them, he's being boastful. Yeah, come back to Seir and inquire of me. Why? Because he knew that he would be gone, right? He knew that he would leave Seir. But the Most High also knew that. And so just because he left Seir doesn't mean that the burden left Seir or Petra or Idumea, all right, or Edom. Verse 13, it tells you now, the burden upon Arabia. In the forest in Arabia shall ye lodge, O traveling companies of Dedanum. So Arabia is not their home. It's a temporary place where they would lodge. So now we start to examine and figure out what the exact secret things are of Esau that were sought out. These are the secret things that were sought out. So let's read on. All right, verse 13, the burden upon Arabia. In the forest in Arabia shall ye lodge, O ye traveling companies of Dedanum. Traveling from where? From Seir to Arabia. The inhabitants of the land of Timah brought water to him that was thirsty. They prevented with their bread him that fled. Right? Going back into us when we fled and so forth, they prevented us and whatnot, and they came against us, which we'll go back and read in Obadiah. For they fled from the swords, from the drawn sword, from the bent bow, and from the grievousness of war. For thus have the Lord said unto me, within a year, according to the years of a hireling, and all the glory of Kedar shall fail. So why does it say Kedar? Who is Kedar? What does Kedar have to do with Esau, Seir? What does Kedar have to do with anything? But what does, more importantly, Kedar have to do with Babylon? Let's see. The Zondervan Bible Dictionary, Kedar. Probably either mighty or dark. One of the 12 sons of Ishmael, son of Abram by Hagar. The tribe which descended from him and their territory. They were, for the most part, nomads raising sheep, but sometimes intruding into villages. Their territory was the northern part of the Arabian desert, right? So this is telling you Babylon, all right, the burden of Babylon is upon who? Arabians, because again, when you study and research and you understand what Arab means and who the Arabs are, you'll see it's a multitude of nations and of people. As we read in the Bible dictionary, Esau and Ishmael carried their seed, and generation to generation, they kept the customs down where? Down in Arabia. All right, the burden of the desert of the sea is the same burden that is the desert of the burden of Dumah, which is the same burden that is upon Arabia. All right, and it's telling you here that the burden, or when he said Babylon is fallen, it's telling you right here in verse 16, for thus have the Lord said unto me, within a year according to the years of a hireling, and all the glory of Kedar shall fail, and the residue of the number of archers, the mighty men of the children of Kedar, shall be diminished, for the Lord God of Israel hath spoken it. So this war, this end time situation, all right, dealing with Babylon, right, when Christ returned, is telling you that burden upon the desert of the sea, the burden upon Dumah, is the burden upon Arabia, and is documented even within their writings. When you go to the Quran, it gives you the history. They know the history, but we have to seek these things out. So let's go to the Quran. All right, let's go to Al-Baqarah. This is part 2, section 17, verse 142. The weak-minded among the people will say, what has made these Muslims turn from their first Qibla? That's what you saw in the video with Dan Gibson. All right, you saw that they had a Qibla set up already, and that first Qibla was where? It was in Mount Seir, also known as Petra, also known as Idumea, right? So it says, what has made these Muslims turn from their first Qibla, the direction they were facing in their prayer, the holy place of worship at Jerusalem. And also, although we know it wasn't necessarily Jerusalem, it was toward Jerusalem, all right? Because all the measurements all point to Petra, all right? It says, to which they conform so far. Say to Allah belongs to the east and to the west. He guides him who wishes to be guided to the right path. So what they're saying is, regardless of where we put the Qibla, they feel like Allah is going to put them on the right path to where they need to be, all right, based on what they believe in. It says, and thus have we made you a nation exalted and justly balanced, so that you may be a guiding example for all the people, by carrying to them what you have learned about Islam and this perfect messenger of God. May we be guiding examples for you. And we did not make that which you will have to be the Qibla, but that we might distinguish him who follows the messenger from him who turns upon his heels. And this change of Qibla is indeed a hard test, except for those whom Allah has guided aright. It was not Allah's purpose that your faith and your worship should go in vain. Surely Allah is compassionate and ever merciful to the people. So he's basically trying to convince them that the first Qibla that they prayed to for the first 100+ years of Islam, which was changing to where? To Mecca, which, as you saw, you only find Mecca written once in the Quran, all right? They were changing from praying to Petra to praying to Mecca or Makkah. And so this is when they started to change or hide or go into what the scripture said, search out their secret things, right? This is when this happened. So as you see here, there's proof. You can go dig up, research, go to Dan Gibson's videos, do the same thing I did, take 2-3 years, whatever it takes to decipher the information and see if those things are to be true, like the scriptures say. So as we go back to the book of Obadiah, let's pick up where we left off, verse 6. How are the things of Esau searched out? How are his hidden things sought up? So how are they sought up? Because of history, because of study, all right? All the men of thy confederacy have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat the bread have laid a wound under thee. There is none understanding in him. Shall I not in that day, saith the Lord, even destroy the wise men out of Edom and the understanding out of the mount of Esau? All right. And so, like I said, I'll touch more on that when I go deeper into Revelation 17, but let's get to the point. and thy mighty men, O T-Man, shall be dismayed to the end, that every one of the mount of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For the violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. In the day that thou stoodest on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried away captives his forces. So at one particular time in history, our brothers stood on the other side while the strangers came in and conquered us. So you can use this for Babylon or you can use this for Rome, but either way, whenever you look at it, our brother Esau was not the one who came in and conquered us. Esau allowed the other nations or the strangers to come in and to conquer us. All right, there's a difference. So it says, in the day that thou stoodest on the other side, meaning they were watching as this was happening, they were allowing them and bringing them in. It says, in the day the strangers carried away captives his forces, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots upon Jerusalem. We read early in Joel that who cast lots? The other nations. They sold us into slavery. To who? The Grecians, that we will be removed far from our borders and be among people whose language we didn't understand because we understood Esau. It says, even thou was as one of them. And you know about the sub-Saharan slave trade. It says you were even as one of them. They even got spoils from it. But thou should have not have looked on the day of thy brother in the day that he became a stranger. Neither shouldest thou have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction. Neither shouldest thou have spoken proudly in the day of distress. Thou shouldest not have entered into the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Yea, thou shouldest not have looked on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor have laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. Neither shouldest thou have stood in the crossway to cut off those of his that did escape. Why? Because they knew our routes. They knew where we would go. These were our brothers. They knew everything about us. And so they stood in the crossway to do what? To cut us off, it says. To cut off those of his that did escape. Some of us escaped those persecutions, but they cut us off and delivered us up. It says, neither shouldest thou have delivered up those of his that did remain in the day of distress. So who did they deliver us up to? Of course, during the time of Babylon, they delivered us up unto Babylon. Right? But if you want to take it up to Rome, that's what most people do. Who did they deliver us up to? The Romans. Because those were the strangers that came in. Esau was not a stranger. Esau was, as you read earlier in the history of the Arabs, our closest of kin, the one who spoke the same languages as us. They were also the same ones you read about in the Zondervan Bible Dictionary who continued the same customs that we had and took them with Ishmael down into Arabia. So when you do read about certain history of Esau dealing with other nations, there is history of Zepho, all right, grandson of Esau, who went and conquered Chittim and ruled over Chittim, right? You read that history and those are two different people. So how could Esau be a so-called, European, white man, Caucasian, whatever name you want to give it, and go conquer those same people, but then go back to his homeland and so forth? It wouldn't make sense. And so the books are giving us information. We have to read, study, be diligent, right? Be patient with the information and see if those things are true. And if they're not true, then it won't hold up. But when it comes to Isaiah 21, when it comes to the prophecy of them leaving Seir and going into Arabia, that can only fit one people. So in examining Isaiah 21, in examining Revelations 17, dealing with the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th kingdom, in examining the customs of the people, in examining the things that pertain to Jacob and Esau as far as it relates to our languages, when examining Japheth's seed, where they dwell, when you examine these things, they don't line up with the understanding that Esau is the white man, but it does line up with the fact that Esau dwelt in these desert places and that he carried the customs, and that in the end time, there's going to be two separate wars, and in those two separate wars, Japheth's seed has a judgment, Esau's seed has a judgment, right? And so you have to look at and examine those things based off of not just thoughts, but based off of history and facts, things that could be proven, right? Things that we see in the scriptures and things that we see in other books. I encourage you to research. I encourage you to study. I encourage you to do the things that are necessary to be proven to the Most High God and not take my word for it, but sit, be diligent, as the scriptures say, and do the things that are proven worthy of the Most High God. Thanks for tuning in. All praise to the Most High God. We ask that you subscribe, leave comments, let us know what your thoughts are. Hopefully in the next class we can address Revelation 17 into more depth, dealing with the harlot.